Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regular board meeting for Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge with gratitude that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Kwotson, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Layaxin, Pauchichin, that better? Didadat and Pachidat, where the peoples have walked gently for thousands of years, and I know I share my gratitude with all of us for being here. With that, we will get underway. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes before we move to adoption today?
There are no changes, Chair.
Look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented, moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Segal. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. With that, we'll move on.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the regular board meeting of July 26, 2023 be adopted.
If there are no errors or omissions, a motion to adopt those minutes. Director Martman.
Just wondering under 23-380 if that could be clarified.
Just a moment while we find that. Three eight zero. That I was moving second to that zero. Yeah, that is.
I'm sure we all saw that, so I just wanted to make sure.
Just yeah. There's. So it's just a numbering error, there was no motion there? Or should we refer these minutes back to our next board meeting? Because it looks like there may be an error in 23379 as well. Okay, we'll table it. Do we need a motion to table? Or can I have a motion to table the minutes? Director Morrison, seconded by Director Douglas. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Director Martman.
Thank you. There's no business arising from the minutes, so therefore we're moving into public input period. The public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an item on the agenda before board considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that may, are, or have been subject to a public hearing. The speaker should comment in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Evans. Thank you for turning the microphone on. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on today's agenda, under committee commission reports, CR1, and then you go down to R17, they talk about or R16, they talk about the application of number ALR 23 CO1 Trans-Canada Highway, and that is to remove soil and gravel from a hill across from Dugan Lake, commonly known, and the site that they want to remove this soil at is commonly known as Bomber Farm. Mr. Chair, it is sitting right on top of a major aquifer, and the hill also has 5 test wells on it. There was a hydrology test done on it, and there's perched aquifers on that hill. And on that test, it said that there is significant leakage from these perched aquifers that are sitting on the hill, and the water just rolls down the hill and it sinks in through the gravel to a major aquifer. That major aquifer feeds Dugan Lake, the Petrolis Creek, and the Cocosila. The Cowichan Watershed Board has done a water test and sampling on the Cocosila, and they have not found one tributary to the Cocosila that doesn't have ruminant E. coli. And so this soil that they're going to fill on where they take the gravel out is going to be compost. So on this hill is also a test well number 2, and its height, its static level, is 20 feet in the wintertime. So I would say that taking into consideration the Cowichan watershed study and what is going to go into that fill, into the fill, the test well should be monitored for ruminant alkali. There should be a test done to show a static level or a level of E. coli or other contaminants, so they can have a base to stand on. If there's further contamination, then something else should happen. I recommend that this be referred back for further study. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair.
Evans. Just one moment. We're just going to take a pause here. It looks like we're having some technical issues, so if you just bear with us for one moment. Hey, Director Nicholson, can you pop over and help us out here for a sec? Thank you for your patience. So just for clarity, Mr. Evans signaled R17, which is what threw me off because I couldn't find R17. That was actually the second point under the original R1. As we know, our system with numbering and then sub-numbering has issues. Mr. Evans, if you look back to the AAC agenda, was actually referring to report R1 Part 2. Somehow in the numbering system it got wrong. I couldn't find R17, so I panicked. But poor Director Nicholson, who chairs that committee, will have to deal with that when we come to the ASC reports. But thank you, Mr. Evans, and we still do have 12 minutes. 3 minutes is great. I'll give you your 3 minutes when we got this
no worries.
working.
Just give me the heads up.
No. Number one is 12 minutes. Total time is 12. Right? Yeah, please. That is new technology. Welcome, and please go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'd like to speak on the same issue as Cliff. My name is Mark Kissinger. I've been an environmental investigator and protector for the government for over 2 decades, most of that being in the Cowichan Valley. And I'd like just to bring up some points here, that if you support this application, please just acknowledge that you're supporting that this is only phase 1 of a multi-phase project. And if it's similar in time length to the first phase, then we're looking at 20 to 30 years of this project being in place, not just 5. Under the Mines Act, as is in the application that they provided, it says that this land shall be reclaimed. It also says that this land's productivity on reclamation of the area shall not be less than the existing. Legal term shall equals recommend. There is no legal ability to enforce shall. It is not must. If it was legal, you must say must. So shall strictly means they recommend. They recommend that you bring this back to the same quality it was. You do not have to, and there's no legal recourse if you don't. The ALC, as in their application states, we encourage the backhauling of good quality agricultural soil. Again, that is not a requirement and is not enforceable. If they don't, there is no recourse that you can take. This project states that they are going to have 10 trucks a day. That 10 trucks a day, if that is, there's no requirement that they have less or more. This is 10 that they're saying. That's 20 trips up and back on that little road in front of all those farms, those farm gates, those vineyards where people go for testing or for tasting. That's 20 trips just from what they're saying. And that's for the hauling out of the soil. Now you have to incorporate the hauling in of the backfill. So it's going to be well over 20 every day. There's nowhere that it states works of hours. There's nowhere it states days of the week. It could be all week, all day. You don't know that. This property that is in question already supports 3 productive fields and pastures that are already in production now. Already in production now on the same property. All around this property, there are viable vineyards, orchards, market gardens, berry farms, livestock farms, and market gates. None of these had to dig out, excavate their gravel, their soil, and bring in fill. They were all able to do it without that. Many of these trucks that'll be coming from Victoria or from Duncan will not be able to turn off the highway directly. They will have to go up Cocosala Road because of the lights, go past Great Greens, go past our fire hall, down that little road. That is going to cause some serious safety concerns for everyone involved, as well as the businesses that are out there. Agritourism, farm gate economies are a huge area that's developing and growing in the Cowichan Valley. If you acknowledge this and you support this, you are killing all those opportunities in that area. No one can go to a farm gate, to a vineyard for tastings. if there are 20 or so trucks a day going past it.
Excuse me, sir, your time has expired. I've given you an extra 15 seconds, but if you want to wrap it up.
Please, I do. If you want to support the BOMs, the community, protect the aquifer, protect aquatourism, say no to this. Allow the BOMs to get in there now, contour their land, add the soil remediation that they want to do now or at the end of their phase. Do it now. They could be farming next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Venturi, and I am speaking about the same application. I did pose a lot of questions yesterday to Shelley Baum, and she kindly responded, and did inform me that there will be no trucks coming along in front of Great Greens, etc. She said all the gravel trucks would be going out north on the highway at that stop sign where our kids get off the school bus, and they will then go to Victoria and then return. Empty trucks will eventually return and come in that same direction. So that is apparently what the plan is, and I acknowledge that is what has been explained. My big problem with this is that when you look at the application, I read the entire fine. They got a hold of the Corvidae report. No mines permits were attached, as they were supposed to be. Maybe they're somewhere else, and I just haven't had a chance to do it. This has been very fast in terms of none of the neighbours being directly informed about this. So, and the mines permit for the 69 acres still stands. And it states that the exact reclamation date is to be determined, and in compliance with all reclamation conditions set out in Mines Act permit da-da-da-da. So there are two permits. The original one, which still stands, they still have a permit to mine 69 acres. This new one, I believe, and I'm sure they will correct me if I'm wrong in later on, is that the one that is for mentioned is talking about 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And my question to them was, what actually is that 5-year part? Is that little part 3.5 hectares? It has not been answered to my satisfaction, because it's all very wishy-washy, to tell you the truth. And when I asked, can you clarify the timeline? What does the 5-year plan include? With the answers to all your questions, she replied, the answer to all your questions are in the CVRD application and the existing mines permit, which you will find in the CVRD archives. Well, that's the big one. And I could not find any answers to those questions there. And in my question, my other concern about the increased risk of death or injury to our children, customers and visitors with all of these trucks going back and forth, and admittedly it doesn't sound like a lot, but there's nothing holding them to it. What recourse do we have if we feel our business is in danger? And we've been in business since 1987. And we invested millions, as I'm sure probably not as many millions as other firms, but millions, and we borrowed that money. And we employ 15 people seasonally, and when COVID hit, we were hard hit. The government shut us down, all the rest of it, and we lost all of our employees, and it's very hard to get them back. So we're struggling. My 80-some-year-old husband, me 70-some-year-old, work for free, pretty much 7 days a week. My daughter is fully invested in this. And one last issue here is we just, when we've said ALC, she said they will take responsibility, the ALC, for our safety, which is totally not the case. Not even the Ministry of Transportation is offered to take responsibility. So for that, I want to again wish the Bums the greatest of luck. Hope they can do this remediation. But this project is not 5 years.
Thank you.
This is just the first part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I seem to have been establishing an overtime policy. I'm going to start sticking to the time. You do have 3 minutes to give your input. We do still have time for a couple of more people to give input before we move on with our agenda.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Kim Bernard, and I'd like to speak to R12. I've spoken to R12 before, the 3-stream curbside collection delivery model that you've been given a report about, and this is for electoral areas. And just by the numbers, it looks like the service will cost over $300 per residence. And I see that as a huge ask to spread the cost of this service over the amount of people participating, because according to the 2018 report, the data that this is derived from, it's only 9%, residences are responsible for only 9% of that possible diverted waste that could impact the overall stuff going to the landfill. And so I'd like to draw attention to that. And this report also can't quantify the level of buy-in that's required for it to work perfectly and for everyone to be paying their bills and doing the sorting, and also to quantify the education required so that people are fully equipped to participate effectively in a program like this. And so I would ask that, a pause and a review be taken. So thank you very much for considering the ask.
Thank you. We do have time for one more speaker for public input, if you wish to come forward.
Hello, thank you. I'm Michelle Baum, speaking for Ballmare Farms and R1, 6, and 7. The questions posed at this question period regarding test wells, well, that is what they are. They're in place to be monitored. As per our mines permit, they will be monitored quarterly, I do believe. And that is the facts. There cannot be any other problems. We are answerable to the Ministry of Mines. Truck traffic is another concern, and we are working with the neighbors concerning in this. But the facts are this truck will be on Vineyard Road no more than 1 minute entering the property and 1 minute leaving. It is a traffic time constraint considering this truck is coming on a backhaul from Victoria, and the fact that in the last 20 years, our farm has had 2 big building projects where we hauled out gravel for every 15 minutes for 6 weeks straight, and it didn't appear to be a problem then. So as these trucks, we use this access for our own 30-ton manure tanker to access our property, and it is designated a commercial access that the businesses on it use it for also. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. We do actually have about 90 seconds left if someone else wanted to give a brief public input before our time expires.
The extraction will also only be happening on weekdays and really business hours, because the company doing it does not work on weekends, not like farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more folks stepping up for public input, so we will move forward with our agenda.
Thank you, Chair. We have no delegations. A report from the chairperson. Thank you. Correspondence. We have C1, correspondence from the Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Climate Leadership Steering Committee for direction.
Thank you. So I think you all see the letter there. Staff are looking for direction. This is, I believe, encompasses a funding request from the Vancouver Island Climate Leadership Group. Director Nicholson.
I think I should speak to this because I am your person appointed onto to this group. It has been a bit of a transition from last term to this term, and I think that this Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Climate Leadership Group is probably going to be a very important moving forward from the perspective of information sharing and advocacy, because many of the issues that we're dealing with, in particular with climate change, are things that we can't just, that they're not specific to our region, but we would really benefit from the support and working with other groups. So this $16,000 ask is for our contribution. They're asking contributions from each of the regional districts to provide basically the administrative and coordinating support that the group requires to continue working together. And so I would like to, I think that it's a minor ask and a really important one, providing support not only to elected officials but to staff. So I would like to see this move forward now as opposed to getting caught up in the budgeting process. And so I would like to make a motion, something to the effect that staff report back on if opportunities to provide funding for this $16,000, which is to cover a 2-year term for the initiative.
That's seconded by, I was going to say Mayor Staples, which is true, but Director Staples. Concluding the discussion, just shoot that in a message format to staff. I think it was to request that staff provide a staff report on $16,000 to cover a 2-year term as the Cowichan Valley Regional District's commitment to the Vancouver Island Climate Council. Is that right? And leadership group. Thank you. Discussion. Motions on the floor. Director Wilson. I saw Director Abbott flinch, but no, Director McClinton and Director Staples.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't see a problem with funding this particular one at all. And I'm sure, I think you may have already answered the question, but staff will come back with a report, and I'm sure that they will probably tell us which budget this will come from, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McClinton.
I'll pass. I was confused about the motion. I understand now.
Thank you. Director Staples.
I can pass. I was just going to say amazing things about the committee.
I was as well, but since we're all seemingly in agreement this afternoon, which is a good start, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.
Moving on to C2, correspondence from Minister Cullen, request to update the Cowichan Estuary Environmental Management Plan for information.
Thank you. That's there for information. Just for the directors, obviously the response was supportive. This was a request that I think came to us originally through North Cowichan Mayor and Council, and we will follow up at a staff level to get those meetings to take place. Thank you.
C3, correspondence regarding R5 DVP 4681 Caspian Place. This agenda was revised to add this correspondence item for information.
And that's for information on a further, later in the agenda, the item that refers to, I believe, is R5. Thank you.
Item 8, information. 9, committee commission reports. CR1, report and recommendation of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of September 6, 2023.
Thank you. And for those who, I'll go to the chair of the committee for the recommendations, and then if there's one to be pulled, the directors can ask. I just want to say, ignore the numbering errors. The substantive part is the resolutions that are presented there. Director Nicholson.
Right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 recommendations that the entire board votes on, and would anyone like any of those pulled?
No.
Okay, so R13, R15, R11, and R14.
Are moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed. None opposed. Motion carries.
So the next set of recommendations are for electoral area directors only, and I know that we've got a few that we would like to have pulled. So can I just confirm which
Chair,
ones
I'd like
they
to
are?
pull R5, please.
R5, and I would like to pull R12. That was very contentious and very close, and I believe staff have maybe got some additional information. Is Danielle there? Oh,
Yeah,
you're
well,
here.
what we'll do is we'll
I
get
knew
all
you
the
were
ones
here.
to be pulled
Okay, I
first,
just
and then
wanted
we'll
to
call
make
you for it.
confirm
Miss
that
Sarah
you're-
Day's here.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm someone could speak to that. Okay, and then, so R12 will pull, and I would like to pull R1, just because I have a comment I'd like to make.
So that was the one that was referred to as R17 in public input, so that's R1,
Yeah.
part 1 and 2.
So R12, R1, and R5
Okay, thank you.
are pulled.
And move the other items?
And move the other items, is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Yep.
Do we have a seconder? Director McClinton, any discussion on the items that weren't pulled? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Go ahead, Director Nicholson.
So I'd like to move R12, that commingled food and yard waste, recycling garbage, and the addition of glass pickup be implemented as a 3-stream curbside collection services for all eligible residents in all electoral areas.
And if we get a seconder, then we can speak to it. Seconded by Director Morrison. Ms. Sarah, did you want to say anything off the outset, or are you just here for questions? Thank you.
So this was a very close vote, and I actually am on the fence on this one. So the issue was whether we do sort of a phase, an introduction of just the bare minimum service that we've talked about, or whether we add some additional elements to it, which would be glass collection and yard waste pickup, which add significant cost. And because some areas have not had very much in the way of haven't had garbage collection at all in the past, this is a huge jump in service levels for them. And so the committee discussed whether it would be better to have a sort of a gentler, softer push at the beginning versus the full meal deal at the beginning. And so I felt that there was a bit of confusion on the cost implications of this. And so I think I would like to ask Ms. Saraday to maybe explain again. So there's the cost of the trucks remain the same, but there is the difference in the sizes of the totes. And I wasn't quite sure as you phased it in how it would work.
Go ahead, Ms. Saraday. Thank you.
Through to you, Mr. Chair, to Director Nicholson. So what we're looking at is a standard set of totes. So the food waste or the commingled food and yard waste tote, depending on what you decide today, would be a standard 120 liter. We were going to bring a tote today, but decided we didn't want to take up too much space. So the question really in front of you is, this tote will be a bear resistant tote of yay height. It's a rolling tote, no matter which service you choose. So the lower cost is residents would only put food waste in that tote, so probably fill up about this much. We estimate, based on our consultant's report, about 140 kilograms per household per year. But what we also know from our friends in other jurisdictions is that inevitably some yard waste will end up there, so staff would have to enforce on that. So the option is to allow residents to put yard waste in there. So that would mean that residents could put yard waste in the totes and we get about 300 to 500 kilograms per household per year. The benefit of doing that is that residents would also have a reduced yuck factor. From an operations perspective too, food waste has a lot of moisture, so when it gets transferred, a lot of that yard waste would help absorb that moisture, which is helpful. And then this is a debatable thing, but what we heard from WildSafe BC and others is that adding yard waste also helps to repress odors. And odor is a concern for residents, but also from a WildSafe perspective to reduce collection or reduce conflicts with bears in particular. Just looking at my colleague Leah Burscheid if you have anything else to add. But that's sort of the gist. So that would be the standard tote size. And then residents could choose to upgrade to a bigger tote size if they wanted to. What we also recognize, though, is this is not going to satisfy everyone's yard waste hopes and dreams. So if you have a very large property or have a lot of branchers, you're still going to have to haul. So just an understanding of yard waste is probably going to end up there, but it's not going to satisfy all the yard waste needs.
And just for clarity, and Director Nicholson had the question about cost differences in the levels of service.
Thank you for that clarification. So if we're looking at food waste only, the estimated cost for that is $270 up to $305. So when we know what the direction is, we're going to go out to RFP and say, this is the composition of the waste that we want you to process, and here's the volume. So that's the estimate based on the knowledge we have today. If we go for option 2, which would be to include yard waste, is $290 to $325. And then, as we talked about too, on top, so that's about $20 difference. And then you can choose to add glass. And what we know about glass is that it ends up in the garbage and it ends up in the recycling totes. We have really great residents who are super keen on hauling their glass to recycling depots, but that's not true for everybody. So it's an option to address that barrier. Thank you.
I'll go to Director Nicholson for a follow-up, and then I had Director Acton, and then I have Director McClinton and Director Wilson.
Thank you, I finally get it. I assume that if you're given a big tote, you could fill it up with whatever, but I think this will become a communications issue if people are only allowed to fill up a little bit of the tote, right? That's really what we've calculated everything on. I just have one other quick question, which is, did you ever consider picking up the plastic bags at the same time you pick up glass?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Nicholson. Yeah, we had our consultant look at that as well as styrofoam, because in the first phase of the consultation, we had a number of people who said, I want you to pick up everything up. It's quite uncommon at this time to have that collection, and there was no good data on how to do that effectively. Please add, Ms. Burscheid.
Also to add to that as well, the province is going to be phasing out flexible plastics and styrofoam materials. So if we're putting all of this cost and energy into having these materials collected, kind of goes counterintuitively, also at a federal level as well.
Thank you. So my speakers list is Directors Acton, McClinton, Wilson, and Morrison, and I will watch for more hands as we go. Director Martman. Next, I have Director Acton from...
I'll pass.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Director
you.
McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just point of clarification, I believe you said this at the committee meeting, ESA meeting, I should say. It's either $290 or $320 for garbage, recycling, and organics, right? So not just, it sounded there like possibly that was $320 just for organics. So just point of clarification. You know, $20, you can say that's not a big deal. For some people it is. I'm just curious about enforcement. So if we did not allow organics, how costly is enforcement?
Through to you, Mr. Chair, to Director McClinton. We haven't done the math on that, to be honest, but me and Ms. Burscheid have been talking a lot about that. Whatever the decision is, we know from our experience with Recycle BC that it's difficult to get people to do the right thing, and if there's a change further down the road, that is even more difficult to get out. We send rat cards, we send newsletters, we do all of these things. In terms of the enforcement, that is something we would have to work with our bylaw staff and our staff. I mean, we're trying to enforce on curbside right now. There's a lot of effort and a lot of time. And yes, to your question, we're talking about 3 streams, so garbage, recycling, and organics, whatever that's going to look like.
Thank you. Next, I have Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I think I heard that there were 2 separate bin sizes. Was that correct? Or one for yard waste plus and one for yard waste minus? Was that true, or they're both the same size? Everything together? I thought I'd heard that you say there were 2 different bin sizes.
Through to you, Mr. Chair, to Director Wilson. So the standard that all this is built on is a 120 liter.
Right.
To start, that would be the standard for everyone. And then if residents were wishing to later upgrade, they could do so, but they would have to pay more.
Okay, but
Yeah.
the same size bin?
To start with, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Morrison, and then Martman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an issue, a file near and dear to my heart. And, staff had referred in the committee meeting that they'd talked to other jurisdictions and just to the north of us at the regional district in Nanaimo, they've just recently brought the yard and garden into the food waste stream. And I found that interesting, and I thought there was some lag time, but I contacted one of the directors up there just for, some general discussion and informed them of what we had passed as a recommendation in committee. And he was actually pretty excited about that because that's kind of where they eventually got to. And the way they explained it to me is much of the same discussion. urban, rural? Is there gonna be yard waste in with the food waste bin anyways, if you just choose food waste? And my understanding of how it rolled out was that they chose the food waste only option and implemented that and found really quickly that people really liked the yard waste option to be included in that. And they were able to, as a result of whatever grant funds they had at that time, shift fairly quickly to bring the yard waste into the food waste stream. So they were glad that they did. They thought that the option 2 that we had adopted was great. They have, and just a side note, they said, whatever you do, make sure you do glass, because glass messes up a whole bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, I was preparing for this meeting and thinking how I'd, in a sense, be willing to go sort of toe to toe and debate back and forth with all of these different points. And where I came to was this. There's not a lot of files that we as a committee and board get to work on as a group that have a significant impact in the lives of all of our region. And I think this, excluding our municipal partners, this is one of those. And I'm hoping that everybody is going to consider the fact that this can be a fairly monumentous decision that we make, and that if we work together and do what I think is the right thing and make that decision to implement the service that we're probably going to end up with right from the beginning, that this will then be a decision that we can look back on in a few months or a few years and think, good decision. And the added benefit is that we won't be going back in 6 months or 3 years or 5 years to rehash the whole thing over again as to adding the additional services. So that's my appeal to my colleagues around the table, is we can do the right thing now, implement a good program, and I think our staff will do a great job in delivering it. And we won't run into the additional costs of adding these services later, and we won't have to debate again and again. So with that, I encourage you to support what was option 2 at committee. Thank you.
I missed your soapbox, Director Morrison. Thank you for that. Director Martman, that wasn't an insult at all. I thought it was a good appeal.
Well, and I will agree with the right thing comment is whatever the board, whatever this group decides, I'm comfortable with. That'll be the right decision, not choosing option 2 or not choosing option 2. I have a question for staff, and that goes back to the consultant's report. And if I'm correct, option 1, which is the base, we're calling it basic, but for my community, it's Gucci. And so option 1 had the highest uptake of respondents of about 70%.
Through to you, Mr. Chair, to Director Martman. I don't know if you want to answer this, Ms. Burshine. It's your favorite topic, the survey?
Sure. So that was the question that's referring to the support for the 3-stream service, and that was 70% that was preferring or supporting option 1. When it came down to selecting the actual option that residents wanted to have, option 2 with glass collection was preferred by 35% versus option 1 had 32%. So that's when they had to select one of the 4 or one of the 2 with the glass additions.
Correct, and I think from my community's perspective, the issue that came out of that survey was they were looking for the option of none of the above. And so consequently, I think I'm still looking at option 1 from the perspective of 70% of the people that originally asked that question were saying, yeah, I can live with this, which I thought from my community was, and my community did take the survey to some extent, was interesting. The piece that I go back to is not about whether we're going to implement this or not. That decision, as we've heard from other directors, has been made. And so it's about do we listen to the service is for the residents? And I think Director Morrison has good points about, maybe we'll look back one day and say we should have done this all or nothing at sort of perspective. But I still think there's a strong argument to be made to say we can do this incrementally. My community is already facing the burden of regional recreation over the next couple more years. And this will be phased in 2025, which means a further year of significant increase to their taxes. And I'm looking for any little way to make that somewhat more palatable. And I think we all need to try to think that impact is going to be important to some people. I guess my last pitch to this is also just wanted to check with Legislative Services on how will our votes be counted on this particular agenda item. Thank you.
Sorry, through to Legislative Services, we were going to highlight that before we call the vote, but it is a weighted vote of electoral area directors, and so they range from a vote strength of 1 for Area F to a vote strength of 5 in Area B, and we can run through that before we call the vote. Because it was brought up as a statement of fact, I just want to check with staff on the solid waste management plan that we submit to the province. Does that become a legislative requirement once that is adopted by the province? Like, we've been on this track for a number of years, and the CVRD in many ways is a laggard in terms of solid and organic waste management. But there seems to be statements saying, oh, we don't have to do this. And maybe that is ultimately true, but I've never seen the CVRD as a laggard when it comes to managing waste. But it seems that that's what we're becoming.
Sorry, the question.
If the solid waste management plan, once adopted and submitted to the province, becomes an expectation of the province that will deliver on those accepted solid waste management plan, like with the liquid waste management plans, so forth.
Yes, similarly.
Thank you. I have Director Segal and then Acton.
Thank you, Chair. This is what I've really struggled with too, and I was one of the people for the bare bones model last week. Yeah, I understand the financial burden, and I've really gone over in my head my own experience with different three-stream services that I've encountered in my life living in cities where I thought everything was accepted. And I actually looked it up, and that's not true. And so I thought that was a really interesting insight into my assumptions of seeing a green bin and thinking that absolutely everything that I know to be compostable couldn't go in there. And I think it's probably safe to assume that a lot of our residents are going to make that assumption as well. And yeah, with more description of the toad and, like my personal, yard waste is like, I can take it for free and I can burn it in my backyard. But also if I had that tote that was just right there and I could just dump it right in, I would for sure use that. And it would reduce my trips to the dump and it would reduce my burning. So, yeah, I'm leaning towards supporting the all-in model with all of that in mind.
Thank you. I have Director Acton online.
Thank you. I just to share with the board that I will be voting for number 1 if that comes up after. I guess we're going to call the question for number 2 first. I think that Shawnee and Lake as a whole has made it really clear that they, like Director Martman, didn't want the service, but I think going less at the moment would be a preferred step. And I can see that the less that service we offer, the less scrutiny we're going to have from the community. And it's going to be a real challenge the more gold-plated we have it as far as delivering that service, and the expectations are going to be much higher. So I would like to start a little bit smaller. And it's really easy for the directors in the north who are saving something like was like $50 per whatever, that regional recreation was a huge savings for them, and there's already have garbage. So this is something that the community is really gonna feel. And anyway, that's my point. Thank you.
So just for a point of clarity, the area directors in the north are not paying less because of regional recreation. Maybe the municipality of North Cowichan and Ladysmith breaks even, but there are no directors in the north paying less due to regional recreation that are involved in this vote. So I just want to make that clear, because I saw the
That's not true.
areas G and H in the north are paying significantly more due to the regional recreation referendum.
Sorry, I mean like Lake Cowichan. Sorry.
Oh, in the west.
You're right.
Okay.
Yes, west.
All right. We're on 3-stream. Okay. It has been moved and seconded. I do not have anyone left on my speakers list. I am going to call the question just to give everyone a run through. I was going to ask our corporate officer to do it, but I'll do it, so I'll take the heat. Electoral Area A, 3 votes. Director, Electoral Area B, 5, C3, D4, E3, F1, G2, H2, and I1. We'll get your prize for you, Director McGonigal, after the meeting. Back to the motion that's on the floor, and this is for option 2, which is the full service with glass collection, correct, staff? Okay. Going to call the question. All those in favor? And I'm going to count the opposed. So we have Directors Acton, Wilson, and Martman opposed. Motion carries. Just double checking our math. All right, back to Director Nicholson. We're still on your report.
This is like,
I'm probably going to take a recess after your report.
this was like the meeting. It was a long one. So the next one is
starting to come loose, but at least we got the rubber band.
Also known as R17.
Yeah, and
R1, Part 1 and 2.
And I pulled this because I would like to, first of all, thank the public who have come out and let us know what they feel about this application and the process that it's gone through, and the BOMs for coming out and answering questions for us. And I would say that the CVRD this is a really good example of how challenged we are when we get applications that we really have very little control over. The regulators are the Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Mines, and the Agricultural Land Commission. We are not really the regulators in this particular land use application. It just seems to have to pass through our hands. So the one thing that we could do, and I've spoken to our CAO about this, she has offered that staff will commit to taking extra time at the beginning of these kinds of applications to let people know what the process is and who the regulators are, who's responsible for, because it is really complicated. And I think sometimes we forget, and we end up spending a lot of time on things that we really can't change. And so that's what I can promise. And hopefully a lot more material will be attached to the application so that people get heads up and they understand everything that's involved. Is that fair comment? I don't want to step out of line. Okay.
See staff nodding. So nobody's moved this or
Move it.
and seconded by Director Morrison. So is there discussion on this item?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Director Acton.
Thank you. I have one concern that we never discussed. This application was heavily discussed at ESC, but hearing people come with concerns about their businesses that surround this one business and how it will affect them, I think is a big concern, and that we never addressed. And it was my understanding that there was First Nations title around Dugan Lake. I've seen, I think, reserve land there, so I'm wondering if staff can answer if there has been consultation or referral, or how do we make sure that happens?
Through to staff. Ms. Trolf?
You hear me? No? Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. No?
No. No. The wireless mics that work less often than...
Test.
Could you please repeat the question, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Trolf?
Please repeat the question, Mr. Chair.
So one was about the impact on neighboring businesses, although I'm not sure that, I think that's something we've heard from people today. I don't know how staff can answer that, but more was around First Nations consultation and that the area around Dugan Lake may be subject to, I'll be clear, we are all within unceded traditional territory of the various nations that are represented in our traditional or unceded territories. None of these are treaty lands within this main area. There are some out west at some point.
I was pretty sure that I've seen Cowichan tribe signage down there.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So applications that are referred to us from other agencies are not referred on to other organizations or agencies or governments. So we would rely on the provincial agencies who've referred them to us to undertake their own consultation processes with other agencies and First Nations. And I would submit that the province of BC has a very high standard or obligation towards local First Nations. And so if there are First Nations interests, it's their responsibility to recognize those. With respect to impacts on neighboring properties, the EASC did put forward a recommendation for the ALC to consider a couple of concerns. And one of those was potential impacts to the aquifer. The other was potential impacts of transportation. And so if there are additional concerns that the electoral area directors would like to forward to the ALC, those could be added to that resolution.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's likely been captured.
Great, thank you. As this is an ALC referral, ALC deals with the consultation requirements, and both the aquifer concerns and traffic concerns on Vineyard Road are part of this resolution that's on the floor. Director Wilson and McClinton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It has been pointed out that these concerns have been addressed in the previous ESC, and they are part of our 1, 6, and 7 on there. One of the things that has been brought up was the effect on businesses here. And I think I have to comment that if there are businesses along there, which there are, then they are also subject to deliveries, I'm sure, by truck traffic. So there is already truck traffic going down this service road. So I'm just wondering if there have been any, what size are going down there and all the rest of it. But that's beside the point at the moment. At the moment, I think everything has been covered in the previous discussions that has been brought up today. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I'm far away from this area, but I got a few big farms in my area, and just, I know this is a challenging decision for me, just hearing the impact, and thank you to everybody that came and spoke. But at the end of the day, the right to self-determination and food security and the people who live on the land or farming the land, I should say, knowing what's best, and that's really what where my vote lies in the end. And certainly a difficult decision. I know, just want everybody to know it wasn't taken lightly, but certainly support the Bombs and their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on my list. This is for electoral area directors only. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Back to Director Nicholson.
I would like to move R5, that development variance permit number DVP 23204 4681 Caspian Place, PID 029746914 be issued, subject to negotiation with the applicant regarding the registration of a restrictive covenant against the use of the building as a secondary dwelling.
Thank you. I believe we will have this pulled. If it's seconded, there was perhaps a referral or something, but I'll let Director Abbott speak to it, but it has been moved. We haven't got a seconder, but, well, it's been seconded by Director Deck. Director Nicholson.
So my question is, in the correspondence, the applicant said that they were not interested in doing a covenant, so I
And that's
don't know
part of
whether
the
it's
motion.
appropriate, it's part of the motion. Should this carry on, or should it be referred back?
I was going to, I'll go to the director that pulled it, Director Abbott, and then I'll look to staff. Because the motion is including the covenant. The applicant is not willing to pursue the covenant.
I guess I'm a little, Chair, I'm a little surprised. I wanted it pulled because I wanted to talk
You can
about.
still amend the motion, Director
Okay.
Abbott, so.
I wanted it pulled because after a spirited discussion at last week's EASC, 2 days later, we get which included a covenant to preclude using the facility as an auxiliary dwelling unit. The applicant decided to go against that covenant and expressly put in writing that they would like to plan on using it as an auxiliary dwelling unit, which was exactly my concern. Ergo, I wanted today to deny this application. Now we have a motion on the floor.
And if the motion is defeated, you could put a motion forward to deny.
So,
Or you could put an amendment forward, but it cannot be to deny the application. So then you would ask your colleagues to defeat this
so
motion.
I'd be calling on my fellow electoral areas to defeat this motion.
Director Martman.
Okay, here goes. With all due respect, I do understand the correspondence we received was withdrawing the covenant, the suggestion of a covenant, which was voluntary on their part, which is my understanding. So it brings it back to the original issue of a person wants to have an accessory building on their property for a shop, not an accessory dwelling unit. What is the role of the board or committee to say, no, we think you're going to have an accessory dwelling there, when the permits and our bylaws state you can build a shop? So, it's not, and a person's intentions, I don't know how you can put that into fact. The fact is, they have a permit for they've made a permit for application for a shop. They're looking for a variance to make it higher. They're saying we don't want to put a covenant out because we don't want to restrict ourselves that maybe one day we want to have a dwelling unit. And yet we're saying we should refuse this. I find this, so it's about people's intents and trying to understand how we vote on intent versus what is actually put in front of us as the fact is they've applied for a shop. And that's their intent, is, that's what the shop is. There's no intent to have this as a place to live in. At least nobody has made an application for that. And if they want to make an application to live in it or have a dwelling unit, then they go through the CVRD process to say, we want to convert this into a dwelling unit. We have a process for that. So I just don't see the issue of this covenant as being as big as that we have bylaws and we have application processes if they want to change it from what their intended use is right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm loath to step in on electoral area items, but as the chair of the board, and this is a board discussion, I do want to say that your point is well taken, Director Martman. I read the letter. It's not something for me to vote on, but they said that they weren't comfortable with the covenant because it would preclude them from having that potential future opportunity. To ascribe that to being a short-term motive is one thing that I think is frankly unfair, but there is some indication that with prices of real estate, I read the letter, that there's some thought to that down the road. Not expressed intent, but the next step for me is there's a tool for that. And you brought that forward very well, and I think that's important to consider. If you wanted to convert it into a dwelling unit, you'd have to go through the application process, and it would be up to the board of the day and the community members of that time to give that information over to the decision-making body, whether to approve or deny it at that time. So that's just, as a process person, and I know sometimes we see process differently, I appreciate the logic in that, but I also have your other colleagues that want to speak to it, and you have spoken to it, but you'll get the last word, or at least the first word in round two. I have Director Segal and Director Morrison.
I just have a question about this letter. I don't think I got it.
It's on the agenda as correspondence item 3. Director Morrison.
I'm loath to jump in too, but I think this doesn't have to be as complicated as it may sound. This is a variance, and I think it was for height, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was, I remember there being some supposition that, you know, the height that was allowed would only allow for a flat roof, and they wanted the peak roof and for storage and the likes, and maybe somebody kind of got found out on what a future use might be, but this was all about a variance. So the question of coming back to us for authorization, if this is the correct zoning for an additional secondary dwelling unit, if there wasn't a variance, we likely wouldn't even see it. So it's not really a question of the intent, or someone's coming to ask for a variance to build this above the stated or the regulated height. If that wasn't before us, then, you know, we wouldn't be even having the discussion. They probably could have proceeded. So looking purely process-wise, are we in the mood to approve the variance as it was presented to us? And that's the real question. Whether or not there's us precluding them from making it a secondary dwelling unit, I don't think it's necessarily related. So in this case, if the director for the area wants it defeated, I don't think we're going to be able to in any way, shape, or form preclude them from making this a secondary dwelling unit at some point in the future if it meets the building code and zoning requirements. That's it.
Thank you. Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make it quick. Yeah, I support the director of the area. I mean, it's clear as day. You look at it, had a flat roof, peak got built. It looks like a place that somebody could live, and it was meant to be a shop. I think go through the process, you know, and get the variance approved before it's built. I just think, you know, and the area in particular is unique challenges with density and population, and the community's clearly looking to try to limit these sorts of things. So support the director of the area.
I have Director Acton, and then I'll go to Director Abbott. Don't worry, you'll get your last word.
I was going to suggest that if this was going to keep going around and suddenly discussing the whole application again, that we just refer it back to EASC, but I'm prepared to vote on denying it.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to approve it with a covenant, and I'm going to go to Director Abbott because he has an appeal to his colleagues.
I'd like to once again ask that my fellow EA directors oppose this motion. It is over height. That is the variance. According to staff, the building was lowered into the ground, lowered below the natural grade to even achieve this over height status. Staff also advised me that the size of the structure will require another variance at a future date if it's to be turned into an auxiliary dwelling unit because it's oversized. I guess what's eating at me is when will we start to say to people and applicants and developers, build the way you said you were going to build, or apply for a variance before you start construction, instead of waiting for the building inspector to come in and find the thing does not look like the form and character that you planned on. It did not have a workshop door. It has French doors. It has a second floor. And I think at a certain point, all we're doing is condoning bad planning, allowing future developers to come along and, or applicants or residents to build things that aren't in accordance with what you said you were going to do. And if we keep doing this, then we'll keep having applications, big and small, that don't comply with what they originally asked for. And it's fine to say that it's just one more, that perhaps they have water and sewage, and it's in the, but it is a very built-up and overtaxed, tiny little part of a new development, and there's going to be a lot more traffic. So once and for all, I'd like it to be clearly stated that this is what you wanted. You had all the opportunities in the world to get back to building and design this structure. It was to have a two-piece washroom. So with due respect, Mr. Martman, Director Martman, the intent was there. When you take out a two-piece and you put in a four-piece and you put in a shower and you put in a dishwasher, it's looking a lot like an auxiliary dwelling unit in the guise of a workshop.
I think we've had enough discussion on this, and I would ask people to temper their enthusiasm. I felt like I was about to call a point of order. I know it gets intense, and these are important decisions, but we always need to just make sure we approach each other in a respectful and calm way. I'm going to go to Director Nicholson, and the motion on the floor is to approve with the covenant, and I think we've heard the discussion, and I don't want to get into a tete-a-tete back and forth, but I'll go to Director Nicholson and Director Martman on round two, and then we'll call the question and we'll look for potentially a further motion.
Thank you. I have 3 questions for staff. The first one is, if we approve this motion, and then you negotiate a covenant, but you can't, does that mean that it's dead, the whole thing's dead? So should that motion actually be amended before?
Well, I think the body, in this case, the electoral area directors could amend the motion. There was a thought that the cleanest way, if the electoral area directors did not want to approve, would be to defeat it and then put a motion to deny. But procedurally, and Ms. Boyd might be able to correct me, but an amendment from a director is open at any time.
Okay. So I have 2 more questions. The second question is, does this zoning allow for accessory dwellings? It does?
Yes.
And so the third thing is, if we deny this variance, what would be the next steps for this person?
Ms. Pressman.
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, this building has a building permit underway, so wouldn't be able to proceed any further until they amend their building permit drawings to come into compliance with the height, if this is denied.
What about the extra washroom facilities, dishwasher and so forth?
The current plans do have the notate that are included in the EASC agenda, do have the notations on there that those weren't to be that it wasn't to be constructed that way.
Thank you. Director Martman.
Oh, don't sit down. And, sorry, thanks, Mr. Pressman. And what about the Board of Variance? Ability to apply to the Board of Variance?
The applicant would be able to apply to the Board of Variance. Board of Variance would be informed of this decision, but the applicant would not be able to proceed any further with the completion of the construction. I don't know if Mr. McDonald would want to add anything else about the building permit process?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just to answer that question on enforcement. So they would be able to proceed. We would want compliance with what they had originally applied for, and that was the shed roof style. So they'd have to take the existing roof that they have now built that was not on their plans and comply with what they had brought forward. And if they didn't, then we'd be looking, taking further action. That could be legal action in that case.
And so clarify, so in that case, I just remember other Board of Variance applications that, you know, had been, we denied it at the board or at the committee to the board, and they went to the Board of Variance. Does that, I'm just trying to understand the process there, because it seemed to be other times, people didn't have to take things down necessarily.
Yeah.
The Board of Variance would say, no, we think it's okay. The extra, I think in this case is 2 inches is the only reason. 5 centimeters is why it came to our board. It was 495, or
I can,
anyways,
but
okay.
I'll spare you a bit of that. Board of Variance, you have to approve a hardship. And in this case, I'm not gonna say yes or no that there is a hardship or not, but that's what it'll come down to. So you're talking about what is the hardship of them changing their plan to something they didn't submit, built it, and then come back and say there's a hardship. So, I don't know, and then I can, if Mr. Elf want to add anything, but I don't think that they would be any more to that.
Okay. Do I have any other speakers? I think I've gotten through them. So I have a question though, just because we might as well go through the whole garden path. Would they be able to submit a further variance application to have an accessory dwelling out of the building that is already constructed to then get a new building permit issued that might comply with what is then partially built?
Mr. Chair, so if this application was denied, the procedures bylaw says that they can submit another application after a year.
Even though it would be
Or
for
they
a-
can submit another application within the year if the board allows that to go forward.
Even
at
though it's a
two-thirds
different
vote.
purpose for the variance? Because
Even though
this
if
is for height on a roof of a workshop, that would be a variance permit for a
Yes,
height on
I
site.
think, respectfully, I think it would be very odd for the owner to come forward and request a variance
Yeah.
to the size to allow the unit with, and then having changed the roof.
I get it. I was just curious more than anything about
not
local
likely.
government. Okay,
So,
thank you.
and just to be clear, the zoning does allow the accessory dwelling unit use, but there's a size limitation, and that building does exceed that size. So if they wanted to use the building as an accessory dwelling, it would require the board to issue another variance for the
So if it
greater
was
size.
approved as a shed and then they wanted to use it as dwelling, it would in fact have to come
Yes.
back before the board because of
Absolutely.
size?
Correct.
Okay, so there would be a process for that, as they say. Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
in addition to obtaining the requisite servicing through the Cowichan Bay Sewer.
Thank you. All right. Oh, man, that's a lot. Do we need a recess before we call the vote? Sorry, Director Abbott's gonna shoot me, I'm sure. So this is a motion to approve with the covenant. We have the letter. We've heard a very full debate on this. I'm gonna call the question for electoral area directors only. Director Martman.
And just clarification, so if this passes, it would mean that this would go back to staff, or?
Well, no, it would pass with the requirement for a covenant, which
Okay.
the proponent has already said they're not willing to
Okay.
do.
Right.
I don't see anybody raising a hand to amend it to remove the covenant requirement. And then, it's a free-for-all after that.
I thought that was the case, so I'd like to make the amendment.
Or you're gonna propose the amendment to remove the requirement, to remove the requirement for the covenant.
That's correct.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Director Segal. So on the, on the amendment, and just a reminder that because of the size of the building, it would still require a further application if they wanted to use it as a dwelling unit. I'm gonna call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? And opposed? The amendment motion is defeated. Back to the original motion. Any other discussion? Seeing none, electoral area directors only. All those in favor? Director Nicholson in favor and opposed. And the motion is defeated with, I think, can you just raise your hands opposed again, because 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Director Acton, 7. Who are we missing from electoral areas? So we got one. Oh, didn't vote, so he's in the affirmative. Okay, so all but Directors Deck and Martman were opposed. Oh, okay. Director Nicholson and poor Director Deck's getting her name wrong today. All right, so we have no motion on the floor. Director Abbott.
I move that we deny the development variance permit.
just want to refer to the number just so it's clear.
R5,
DVP
DVP 23D04.
Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded by Director Wilson. Any further discussion? Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. So the facts of the case are the following. There's an application for a accessory building. It's slightly over what would have been an automatic approval by staff. It's over by 2 inches. Sorry, not centimeters, but it's over.
Ms. Pressman, what is the actual number? I can just recount it through the microphone. Yeah, 0.5 meters. Yeah. It's 4.5 meters to 5.
And at what point
So-
would it have been automatically approved?
Oh, what's the actual height? Not the difference in the building permit number, but actually in the, like, allowance. Sorry.
Through the chair to Director Martman. So in the staff report to the EASC, it was described that the procedures bylaw allows for delegation of some minor DVP applications, but that the amount of variance that was being requested was beyond that delegated amount. You're asking what that amount was? I'll just have to go and look. But that doesn't mean that it would be automatically approved. It just means that that decision would fall to the general manager rather than the board. I can go get that amount.
Thank you, Ms. Pressman. And then I have Director Wilson on my speakers list.
Suggest we take, oh,
Yeah, you were right, Director Martman. That amount was 2 inches. The difference in what's delegated or what falls to the board.
Thank you, Ms. Pressman.
thank you.
I'm going to just implore my colleagues that, like, we've discussed this to death and we're all making virtuous statements because we feel we need to get a point across. We're here to make decisions, but I'm going to let the speakers speak. Director Martman and then Wilson.
Thank you. I think the idea of good governance and good decision-making is to have assessment of the facts, and that's what I was just trying to summarize. That we have an application for a variance. The variance came to us and didn't go through delegation to the general manager because of a variance of 2 inches, of a height of 2 inches. If it had not been that for the extra 2 inches, it would have been delegated to the general manager. I think that's the facts that we just heard. The other fact is that this is a variance for height, and it's a variance for a shop. And so the things that really concern me about good decision-making is when we add in pieces that are not, I guess, considered to be part of what the variance is about. And I defer to the board because you'll make the right decisions overall. But if you add more things in than is relevant to what is being asked, and that is about the variance, I think you tend to go down the route of adding a lot of subjectivity. And so I think that's the piece that I would appeal to. Look at the facts. Are we staying within them, or are we extrapolating and looking at other things? Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm kind of speaking on behalf of Director Abbott here because I'm normally the one that gets a bit hit up. And sort of slinging stuff around. But here's, and I agree with Director Martman, of course, we've got to look at the facts, and it is only 2 inches. But here's the thing that Director Abbott has brought up. This bears no resemblance to the original drawings whatsoever. Everything's been added to it. Where do you stop? I mean, there were supposed to be garage doors. There's not. There's French doors. There's supposed to be this. There's not. There's something else. So from that point of view alone, yes, there is a variance, but there were other variances going on before this this variance came here. So in this particular case, I think Director Abbott needs some support here because there has been these changes going along as the building has been built. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion to deny is on the floor. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Directors Martman, Segal, Nicholson opposed. The motion carries. Director Nicholson, does that take you to the conclusion of your report?
Thank you. That's the conclusion of my report.
And we're going to take a 10-minute recess. We'll be back at 3:10. Thank you very much.